Hello there. This is Group 4, and this is our human anatomy reporting. And we will be having the pineal gland, which will be discussed by Snyder and Texan. And we'll be having the thymus by Tabelon. We'll have the other endocrine tissues and organs with the eicosanoids and growth factors to be discussed by Shadalin Startarona and Yvette Shianko. And then we have the stress hormone, which will be discussed by me, Godfrey Sigamata, and we will have the development of the endocrine system, which will be discussed by Tantoko and Suiko.
Good morning, everyone. This is Ruth Snyder from Group 4. So my groupmate J. Victor Texon and I are going to discuss about the pineal gland. Without further ado, let's get started. The pineal gland is a small endocrine gland attached to the roof of the third ventricle of the brain at the midline, or between the two cerebral hemispheres. It arises during the 7th week as an outgrowth between the thalamus and colliculi of the midbrain from ectoderm associated with the diencephalon. Its name is derived from its shape, which is similar to that of a pine cone, or Latin pinea. Pineal gland is also called epiphysis cerebri or pineal body. Pineal gland is part of the epithalamus and positioned between the two superior colliculi. In adult humans, it is about 0.8 cm or 0.3 inch long, has a mass of 0.1 to 0.2 grams, reddish-gray color, and is covered by a capsule formed by the pia mater. The gland consists of masses of neuroglia and secretory cells called pinealocytes. The primary function of the pinealocytes is the secretion of the hormone melatonin, which is important in the regulation of circadian rhythms. Now, circadian rhythms are 24-hour cycles that are part of the body's internal clock. One of the most important and well-known circadian rhythms is the sleep-wake cycle. So, when properly aligned, a circadian rhythm can promote consistent and restorative sleep. But when the circadian rhythm is thrown off, it can create significant sleeping problems, including insomnia. The circadian rhythms throughout the body are connected to a master clock, sometimes referred to as the circadian pacemaker located in the brain. Specifically, it is found in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN, which is in a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. The suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN, is highly sensitive to light, which serves as a critical external cue that influences the signals sent by the SCN to coordinate internal clocks in the body. For this reason, circadian rhythms are closely connected to day and night. During the day, light exposure causes the master clock to send signals that generates alertness and help keep us awake and active. As night falls, the master clock initiates the production of melatonin, a hormone that promotes sleep and then keeps transmitting signals that help us stay asleep through the night. The pineal gland is mainly responsible for the nighttime melatonin secretion. Without the proper amount of melatonin hormone, the body will struggle to sleep and wake at the same time. So, my groupmate J. Victor will further discuss the details about the melatonin hormone. Thank you.
The pineal gland secretes melatonin, an amine hormone derived from serotonin. Melatonin appears to contribute to the setting of the body's biological clock, which is controlled by the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus. It is produced naturally from the amino acid tryptophan by the pineal gland at nighttime. Alternative name for melatonin is N-acetyl 5-methoxytryptamine. As more melatonin is liberated during darkness than in light, this hormone is thought to promote sleepiness. In response to visual input from the eyes, the suprachiasmatic nucleus stimulates sympathetic postganglionic neurons of the superior cervical ganglion, which in turn stimulate the pinealocytes of the pineal gland to secrete melatonin in a rhythmic pattern. With low levels of melatonin secreted during the day and significantly higher levels secreted at night. During sleep, plasma levels of melatonin increase tenfold and then decline to a low level again before awakening. Small doses of melatonin given orally can induce sleep and reset daily rhythms, which might benefit workers whose shifts alternate between daylight and nighttime hours. Melatonin also is a potent antioxidant that may provide some protection against damaging oxygen-free radicals. Melatonin levels are higher in children and decline with age into adulthood, but there is no evidence that changes in melatonin secretion correlate with the onset of puberty and sexual maturation. Synthesis and secretion of melatonin is dramatically affected by light exposure to the eyes. The fundamental pattern observed is that serum concentrations of melatonin are low during the daylight hours and increase to a peak during the dark. The mechanism behind this pattern of secretion during the dark cycle is that activity of the rate-limiting enzyme in melatonin synthesis, the serotonin N-acetyltransferase, is low during daylight and peaks during the dark phase.
Have you ever wondered what organ is an endocrine gland and at the same time a lymphatic gland? Yes, you're right. It is the thymus. The thymus is a bilobed organ. It is located in the mediastinum between the sternum and the aorta. As what I've said earlier, it is both a lymphatic gland and an endocrine gland. This organ produces hormones such as thymosin, thymic humoral factor, thymic factor, and thymopoietin. These hormones promote the proliferation and maturation of T cells. For those who do not know what T cells are white blood cells which destroy microbes and foreign substances. Thymic hormones may also help retard the aging process, meaning it delays the aging process.
Other endocrine tissues and organs, eicosanoids and growth factors. Cells and organs other than usually classified as endocrine glands have an endocrine function and secrete hormones. The gastrointestinal tract, or the GI tract, is the tract from the mouth to the anus which includes all the organs of the digestive system in humans and other animals. Food taken in through the mouth is digested to extract nutrients and absorb energy and the waste expelled as feces. The mouth, esophagus, stomach, and intestines are all part of the gastrointestinal tract. Gastrin is a peptide hormone that stimulates the secretion of gastric acid by the periodic cells of the stomach and aids in gastric motility. It is released by G cells in the pyloric antrum of the stomach and the pancreas. Glucose-dependent insulinotropic peptide is a hormone released from the small intestine that enhances the release of insulin following the intake of food. It is a member of the family of hormones known as the importance of which other main member is the hormone glucagon-like peptide. It stimulates release of insulin by pancreatic beta cells. The secretin is a hormone released into the bloodstream by the duodenum, especially in response to acidity. It stimulates secretion of pancreatic juice and bile. The last one is the cholecystokinin is a peptide hormone of the gastrointestinal system responsible for stimulating the digestion of fat and protein. Cholecystokinin, officially called pancreozymin, is synthesized and secreted by enteroendocrine cells in the duodenum. It stimulates secretion of pancreatic juice, regulates release of bile from gallbladder, and causes feeling of fullness after eating. The placenta. Placenta is an organ that develops in your uterus during pregnancy. This structure provides oxygen and nutrients to your growing baby and removes waste products from your baby's blood. Placenta attaches to the wall of your uterus and your baby's umbilical cord arises from it. The human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG, stimulates corpus luteum in ovary to continue production of estrogens and progesterone to maintain pregnancy. Estrogens and progesterone is to maintain pregnancy, help prepare mammary glands to secrete milk. Human chorionic somatomamotropin, or HCS, stimulates development of mammary glands for lactation. Kidneys. Renin, part of reaction sequence that raises blood pressure by bringing about vasoconstriction and secretion of aldosterone. Erythropoietin, or EPO, increases rate of red blood cell formation. The calcitriol aids in absorption of dietary calcium and phosphorus. The heart. Atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP, decreases blood pressure. In the adipose tissue, there is leptin. It suppresses appetite, may increase FSH and LH activity.
Eicosanoids. Eicosanoids bind to receptors on target cell plasma membranes and stimulate or inhibit the synthesis of second messengers. There are two families of eicosanoid molecules, the prostaglandins and leukotrienes, which are found in virtually all body cells except the red blood cells, where they act as local hormone, which is the paracrines or autocrines, in response to chemical or mechanical stimuli. They are synthesized by clipping a 20-carbon fatty acid called arachidonic acid from membrane phospholipid molecules. From arachidonic acid, different enzymatic reactions produce prostaglandins or leukotrienes. Thromboxane. Thromboxane is a modified prostaglandins that constricts blood vessels and promotes platelet activation. Appearing in the blood in minute quantities, eicosanoids are present only briefly due to rapid inactivation. To exert their effects, eicosanoids bind to receptors on target cell plasma membranes and stimulate or inhibit the synthesis of second messenger such as cyclic AMP. When we say cyclic AMP, it is a cyclic form of adenosine monophosphate or adenylic acid that plays a major role in controlling many enzyme-catalyzed processes in living cells. Leukotrienes stimulate chemotaxis, which is the attraction to a chemical stimulus of white blood cells, and mediate inflammation. While the prostaglandins alter smooth muscle contraction, glandular secretion, blood flow, reproductive processes, platelet function, respiration, nerve impulse transmission, lipid metabolism, and immune responses. They also have roles in promoting inflammation and fever, and also in intensifying pain. Growth factors. Several of the hormones produced by the endocrine system stimulate cell growth and division. In addition, several more recently discovered hormones called growth factors plays an important role in tissue development, growth, and repair. Growth factors are mitogenic substances, which cause growth by stimulating cell division. So here is a summary of sources and actions of the 6 important growth factors. First is the nerve growth factor, or the NGF. NGF produced in submandibular salivary glands and hippocampus of brain. It stimulates growth of ganglia in embryo. It also maintains sympathetic nervous system. The NGF stimulates hypertrophy and differentiation of neurons. Next is the epidermal growth factor, or the EGF. EGF produced in submaxillary salivary glands. It stimulates proliferation of epithelial cells, fibroblasts, neurons, and astrocytes. The EGF suppresses some cancer cells and secretion of gastric juice by stomach. Platelet-derived growth factor, or the PDGF. The PDGF produced in blood platelets. It stimulates proliferation of neuroglia, smooth muscle fibers, and fibroblasts. It appears to have a role in wound healing, and it also contributes to the atherosclerosis development. Next is the fibroblast growth factor, or the FGF. FGF found in pituitary gland and brain. It stimulates proliferation of many cells derived from embryonic mesoderm, which is the fibroblast, adrenocortical cells, smooth muscle fibers, chondrocytes, and endothelial cells. It also stimulates formation of new blood vessels, which is the angiogenesis. Next growth factor is the tumor angiogenesis factors, or the TAFs. TAFs is produced by normal and tumor cells. It also stimulates growth of new capillaries, organ regeneration, and wound healing. Lastly, the transforming growth factor, or the TGFs. TGFs is produced by various cells as separate molecules, which is the TGF alpha and the TGF beta. The TGF alpha has activities similar to epidermal growth factor, while the TGF beta inhibits proliferation of many cell types.
Hello there, my name is Godfrey Sigamata, and I'm going to be talking about stress, the 6-letter word which we all know. And every human being at many points of their lives will come upon stress in many situations. But what we don't tend to acknowledge is its role with the endocrine system. It has more to do with the endocrine system than we actually think. So, stress is a feeling of emotional or physical tension. It doesn't necessarily have to be negative. It just has to be a feeling of emotional or physical tension. Yes, you are stressed when a scary man is chasing you down the street. But it is also considered stress when you're looking at someone you really like. Your heart starts beating faster and you get nervous. Your body functions become a bit more active, and that's physical and emotional tension right there. So any stimulus that produces a stress response is called a stressor. It could be heat, it could be coldness, it could be how you stubbed your toe, it could be how you argued with your friend. It could even be from a toxin released by some bacteria that you accidentally ingested. So many things can be stressors. So here we have James and Donnie. So James just watched a horror film. Now, yes, it does give a thrilling response in our body. Yes, I have at some points watched a horror film, and yes, it sends my heart beating real hard. But then we have Donnie here. He just lost his job because of the pandemic. He just learned that he could no longer work, and life has been very rough on him. And this is a very high form of stress. And this is more of a negative stress, and that's exactly what I'm trying to show here. James is experiencing eustress, 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 and that's positive. Well, not generally positive, it may be neutral, but it's a less harmful stress. It's actually a stress that may be good for you. It's a stress that is not going to affect you long term in a negative way. But then there's Donnie. He's experiencing distress, distress, which is much more negative and may lead him to much more complicated problems. And then we have stress when it comes to bodily changes. Now, your body's homeostatic mechanism always tries its best to counteract stress. When your body reacts to stress, all the heart beating, your mind running, and your muscles suddenly getting more active, and many other feelings that you have, your body will always try to bring it back to normal. In 1936, Hans Selye, this man right here in the picture, a pioneer in stress research, he is an endocrinologist, he showed that a variety of stressful conditions, or noxious agents, elicit a similar sequence of bodily changes. There was a pattern in the many stressful situations that he found in his subjects, as well as their reactions to noxious agents. And these changes in the body were called stress response or general adaptation syndrome, GAS. And this occurs in 3 stages. Now, the first stage is fight or flight response. So the fight or flight response, as you all know, is when your body actually starts getting really active. So this is initiated by nerve impulses from 1, the hypothalamus to the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, and 2, to the adrenal medulla. So as you can see here in the picture, I'd like you to look at the green lines. So it starts where at the top it says stressor stimulate, so that's when it starts, and then you go to how the nerve impulses go to the sympathetic centers of the spinal cord, then to the sympathetic nerves, and then immediately to the visceral effectors and to the adrenal medulla. So it brings a huge amount of glucose and oxygen to the organs that are most active in warding off danger. The brain works harder, your skeletal muscles become more active and able to make you move more, and your heart beats faster in order to provide more oxygen around your body and provide more nutrients and energy, passing it around. So stress responses actually have a lot of things going on. But one thing to consider, one thing that I'd like to point out is that there is a decrease in digestive activities. That's on number 8. That has something to do with how, even though what you might first think is that your body is having immediately active responses, your body will inhibit some responses, and in this case it's the digestive activities. Now, one thing to also remember is that the adrenal medulla, its function in this fight or flight response is that it releases epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, those substances supplement and prolong fight or flight responses. That's pretty much it for the fight or flight response. And we go to the resistance response. So unlike the short-lived fight or flight, the resistance response lasts longer. And the resistance response responds to hormones released largely by the hypothalamus. So where the fight or flight is governed by nerve impulses, the resistance response has more to do with our hormones. So here in the diagram, you can see that well, let's look at the red arrow. The hypothalamus releases corticotropin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone, and thyrotropin releasing hormone, which in turn makes your anterior pituitary release adrenocorticotropic hormone, human growth hormone, and thyroid stimulating hormone. So with the adrenocorticotropic hormone, it makes the adrenal cortex release cortisol. Stress responses include lipolysis, gluconeogenesis, protein catabolism, sensitized blood vessels, and reduced inflammation. And then we have our human growth hormone, which in turn makes our liver release insulin-like growth factors, which makes the stress responses lipolysis and glycogenolysis. So these have things to do with breaking down of sugars, breaking down of fats, and production of sugars, breaking down of proteins, protein catabolism, and making your blood vessels sensitized and reducing inflammation as a response to what happens with your fight or flight response. And the TSH, the thyroid stimulating hormone, makes the thyroid gland release the thyroid hormones T3 and T4. And this increases the use of glucose to produce ATP, which, as I said, this is in reaction to what your fight or flight response is doing. And the final stage is exhaustion. Of course, after every strenuous activity, which this one generally could be considered as a strenuous situation. At this stage, there are so little resources left for our body to sustain the resistance response, and we become exhausted. So our body's resources have been depleted. It's almost like our energy gauge has gone to an all-time low. The prolonged exposure to high levels of cortisol and the other hormones that were released in order for this to happen, these cause the wasting of muscles. So your muscles are weak now, they're less active than before, they're less able to move. You have the suppression of the immune system because apparently cortisol is an immunosuppressant. And then you have ulceration of the gastrointestinal tract because of the inhibition, the failure of pancreatic beta cells as well. And then we have to tackle about how disease actually plays a role in stress. Although the exact role of stress in human disease is not known, we don't really know for sure that stress has something in a human disease, but it is clear that stress can lead to particular diseases by temporarily inhibiting certain components of the immune system. So people constantly under stress are at a greater risk of developing chronic diseases or dying prematurely. So, interleukin 1 is a substance secreted by macrophages of the immune system, and it's an important link between stress and immunity. As much as cortisol has something to do with breaking down sugars, breaking down fats, and suppressing our inflammation, it also has something to do with suppressing the release of interleukin 1. And interleukin 1 is apparently a component of our immune system. In turn, when we're exhausted in the end of our stressful situation, even during, it has something to do with that, our immune system is drastically suppressed. And we do have the chance to get way more diseases than we could ever ask for. One more thing worth noting is that this discovery that cortisol is a immunosuppressant is very important to organ transplants, because when you have an organ transplant, a person's immune system may react violently to that organ that's being donated. So this immunosuppressant gives your body time to get used to the new organ.
The endocrine system is a control system of ductless glands that secrete hormones within specific organs. Hormones act as messengers carried by the bloodstream to different cells in the body, which then interpret and act on these messages. Hormones are responsible for the body's ability to maintain homeostasis and respond to stimuli. Without hormones, you cannot grow, maintain a constant temperature, produce offspring, or perform the basic functions essential for life. The endocrine system provides an electrochemical connection from the hypothalamus of the brain to the organs that control the body metabolism, growth, development, and reproduction. The system regulates hormones through negative feedback, except in specific cases like childbirth. Increases in hormones activity decreases the production of that hormone. The immune system and other factors contribute to the maintenance of constant hormone levels. The main endocrine glands are hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal, pancreas, and gonads.
So to start the development of the endocrine system, I'll be showing to you the timeline of its development. As fertilization begins, the pituitary gland develops about 3 weeks after fertilization. It develops from two different regions of the ectoderm. On the 4th week of fertilization, the thyroid and parathyroid glands develop. The thyroid gland develops as an outgrowth of endoderm called the thyroid diverticulum from the floor of the pharynx at the level of the second pair of pharyngeal pouches. The parathyroid glands develop as outgrowths from the third and fourth pharyngeal pouches, which help to form structures of the head and neck. During the 5th week, the adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla develop and have completely different embryological origins. The adrenal cortex is derived from the same region of mesoderm that produces the gonads. Endocrine tissues that secrete steroid hormones all are derived from mesoderm. The adrenal medulla is derived from ectoderm from neural crest cells that migrate to the superior pole of the kidney. During the 5th through 7th weeks from two outgrowths of endoderm, the pancreas develops. It develops from the part of the foregut that later become the duodenum. The two outgrowths eventually fuse to form the pancreas. During the 7th week, the pineal gland arises as an outgrowth between the thalamus and colliculi of the midbrain from ectoderm associated with the diencephalon. A major organ of the endocrine system is the pituitary gland. It consists of two parts, namely posterior pituitary and the anterior pituitary gland. The posterior pituitary, or the neurohypophysis, and the infundibulum are derived from an outgrowth of ectoderm called the neurohypophyseal bud, located on the floor of the hypothalamus. The posterior pituitary comprises the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. It consists of hormones known as posterior pituitary hormones that are synthesized by the hypothalamus and include oxytocin and antidiuretic hormones. The hormones are then stored in neurosecretory vesicles before being secreted by the posterior pituitary into the bloodstream. The posterior pituitary consists mainly of neuronal projections extending from the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus. These axons release peptide hormones into the capillaries of the hypophyseal circulation. These are then stored in neurosecretory vesicles before being secreted by the posterior pituitary into the systematic bloodstream. The posterior pituitary is composed of two parts. The pars nervosa, also called the neural lobe, it constitutes the majority of the posterior pituitary and is the storage site of oxytocin and vasopressin, and the infundibular stalk, also known as the infundibulum. It bridges the hypothalamic and hypophyseal systems. Next is the anterior pituitary, or the adenohypophysis. It is derived from an outgrowth of ectoderm from the roof of the mouth called the hypophyseal pouch, or rat case pouch. The anterior pituitary is the glandular anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. The anterior pituitary regulates several physiological processes including stress, growth, reproduction, and lactation. Its regulatory functions are achieved through the secretion of various peptide hormones that act on target organs, including the adrenal gland, liver, bone, thyroid gland, and gonads. The anterior pituitary itself is regulated by the hypothalamus and by negative feedback from these target organs. It is composed of multiple parts, namely pars distalis, pars tuberalis, and pars intermedia. The pars distalis is the distal part that comprises the majority of the anterior pituitary. It is where most pituitary hormone production occurs. In the pars tuberalis, it forms a sheet that extends up from the pars distalis and wraps around the pituitary stalk. Its function is poorly understood. Lastly, the pars intermedia is the intermediate part that sits between the pars distalis and the posterior pituitary and is often very small in humans. Next are the thyroid and parathyroid glands. The thyroid gland develops as a midventral outgrowth of endoderm called the thyroid diverticulum from the floor of the pharynx at the level of the second pair of pharyngeal pouches. The thyroid gland is the first of the body's endocrine glands to develop. This occurs under the influence of fibroblast growth factor signaling pathways. It originates from two main structures, the primitive pharynx and the neural crest. The rudimentary lateral thyroid develops from neural crest cells, while the median thyroid, which forms the bulk of the gland, arises from the primitive pharynx. The parathyroid glands develop from endoderm as outgrowths from the third and fourth pharyngeal pouches. The parathyroid glands are the main source for circulating parathyroid hormone, a hormone that is essential for the regulation of calcium and phosphate metabolism. The parathyroid glands develop during embryogenesis from the pharyngeal pouches with contributions from endodermal and neural crest cells. Next are the development of the adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla. Both have completely different embryological origins. The adrenal cortex is derived from the same region of mesoderm that produces the gonads, while the adrenal medulla is derived from ectoderm from neural crest cells that migrate to the superior pole of the kidney. The inside core adrenal medulla is neural crest in origin. Mesenchyme surrounding these cells differentiates to form a fetal cortex. This fetal cortex is later replaced by the adult cortex. The outside adrenal cortex is derived from mesenterium and can be further divided into three distinct layers, namely the zona reticularis, zona fasciculata, and zona glomerulosa, each with distinct hormonal functions. Lastly, I will be talking about the development of the pancreas, the pineal gland, and the thymus. The pancreas develops from two outgrowths of endoderm from the part of the foregut that later becomes the duodenum. The two outgrowths eventually fuse to form the pancreas. The pancreas forms during development from two buds that arise from the duodenal part of the foregut, an embryonic tube that is a precursor to the gastrointestinal tract. It is of endodermal origin. Pancreatic development begins with the formation of a dorsal and ventral pancreatic bud. Each joins with the foregut through a duct. The dorsal pancreatic bud forms the neck, body, and tail of the developed pancreas, and the ventral pancreatic bud forms the head and uncinate process. The pineal gland arises as an outgrowth between the thalamus and colliculi of the midbrain from the ectoderm associated with the diencephalon. The human pineal gland grows in size until about 1 to 2 years of age, remaining stable thereafter. Although its weight increases gradually from puberty onwards, the abundant melatonin levels in children are believed to inhibit sexual development and pineal tumors have been linked with precocious puberty. The thymus arises from endoderm of the third pharyngeal pouches. The epithelium of the thymus develops first, appearing as two outgrowths, one on either side of the third pharyngeal pouch. It sometimes also involves the fourth pharyngeal pouch. These extend outward and backward into the surrounding mesoderm and neural crest-derived mesenchyme in front of the ventral aorta. Here, the thymocytes and epithelium meet and join with connective tissue. The pharyngeal opening of each diverticulum is soon obliterated, but the neck of the flask persists for some time as a cellular cord. By further proliferation of the cells lining the flask, bud of cells are formed which become surrounded and isolated by the invading mesoderm.
And that was all for the Group 4 Human Anatomy report. Hopefully, you've gained a lot of knowledge from this. Thank you very much for listening to our report.